you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Our speaker today is Chris Strager. He's a meteorologist, and if you recall when we had the last meteorologist, he told us about how people at the bus stop swear at him and call him all kind of names if the weather isn't the same as he said it was going to be. But Chris is 40 years as a meteorologist. He has a Bachelor of Science from Penn State in meteorology and a master's degree from Texas A&M in meteorology. So I think he will be pretty accurate. Okay? Please welcome Chris.
Thanks, Jared. Well, he set me up on that one. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this too loud or too soft? All right, sounds good. Hey, thanks again for having me today. It's good to come out here and speak. I retired from the National Weather Service in August of 2020, moved back home. I was in Kansas City at the time, so I live over in Moon Township. Since that time, I've been getting involved in the community, doing some cooking for Meals on Wheels and some other items, but I had a great time in both the Air Force and National Weather Service. I just want to start out today, what we're going to be talking about today, or what I'd like to discuss with you, my career in meteorology and over 40 years of what I did, how it shows in the way times have changed and the way forecasts are made, the way they're perceived and the way they're acted upon today. I want to talk, we used to call it the third rail. I want to grab the third rail today a little bit and talk about climate change. I know that everybody has an opinion about that. We'll discuss that for a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we use that got the former meteorologists yelled at bus stops, how we produce the data, and how that comes about to make the forecast for the day. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of a look at the winter that was, and a little bit of a look at the spring and summer that's to come. So as far as my career goes, it started way back when I was 16 years old. I was born and raised over in McKeesport, and my dad worked at Christie Park Steel Mill, and he came in and told me one day, he said, son, he said, if you want to go to college, you got to start making a plan now because you're on your own. We don't have the money to go to college. And he suggested I go down to the Air Force recruiter. So I did, and as a very arrogant 16-year-old, as most 16-year-olds are, the recruiter said, so what are you interested in? I said, I like the weather. What are you going to do about that? And he said, he pulled out the brochures at the time, back in the 70s, there was no computer, it was all glossy brochures. And he said, what about this? And I was sold. So I signed up, and I was the greenest recruit ever as a 17-year-old basic trainee. Went for 6 weeks down to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. And when I was done, I went to Chanute Air Force Base for a 12-week course in Rantoul, Illinois, and they taught me how to be a certified weather observer. And I thought, 12 weeks? I need 12 weeks to tell you there's a cloud in the sky. Little did I know, as a still arrogant 17-year-old, what that entailed. When they teach you to become a weather observer, or what they used to teach you, it was you had to tell how many clouds were in the sky, how many octas or eighths of cloud were in the sky, what level they were, low, middle, or high cloud. If it was above 12,000 feet, you had to estimate using upper air soundings where the moisture was. If it was low cloud, we had a rotating beam ceilometer would tell us the base. And that was important because when I got to my first studio location at Griffiths Air Force Base, it was up in Rome, New York, we had a lot of weather up there, a lot of lake effect snow. We averaged over 133 inches of snow up at Griffiths Air Force Base. And the most interesting thing about that job, they put me out in what they called a remote observation site. And to this day, it's probably the coolest job I ever had. The base was over here, the runway was over here, and the remote observing site was indeed that. It was remote. It was on the other side of the runway, up on the outskirts of the woods, a little shack that was about 15 feet by 15 feet with glass walls, and that's what I did. They put me out there, and for 8-hour shifts, I'd go ahead and observe the weather. Clouds moved in, I had to hurry up and report it before the SAC bomber routes came back, the refueling, the tankers came back. If the visibility dropped below 7 miles, we had specific mile markers that we had to know and memorize to be able to accurately tell what is going on in terms of visibility. Wind gusts, thunderstorms, we had to tell them when the thunderstorms began. If there was hail, that was a whole nother bunch of regulations that we had to go through. At the time and to this day, surface observations are all in a very prescribed format. And being a good weather observer in the day meant that you didn't make any errors on the forms that recorded these observations. They all got sent out long line all across the world, and they used this for the bombers and tankers coming back to base. So I got a real education there, but I also got blessed by the Air Force. The big reason I went, like I said, into the Air Force was to get an education, hopefully. And I was blessed enough to be awarded an ROTC scholarship. So I went to Penn State, studied for 4 years, and received my Bachelor of Science in Meteorology in 1983. I had a brand new, so in a span of 2 weeks, I had a brand new wife, a commission, a degree, and got sent off to my first studio location. This is up at K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Now, I want to say this right now. I made a mistake. As a young guy, they said, well, where do you want to go for your bases? And I said, I like snow. Trust me, that the one thing the Air Force never forgot was that I said, I like snow. So I got to K.I. Sawyer, and their snowfall, they're up in about, the winter we were there, I believe, is about 180 inches of snowfall, which is over 4 times what we get here in the Pittsburgh area. So my wife and I drove up. We were young kids. She was 19, I was 22 at the time. And she grew up in Hawaii. Her dad was a contractor. So it was June, we drive on to base, and they have the fire hydrants, and the fire hydrants have the big flags, of course, so the snow plows don't knock the fire hydrants over when they're plowing. And she said, why are there flags on top of the fire hydrants? And I didn't have the heart to tell her that that's what's coming in a few months. I said, they're just getting ready for 4th of July. It's very festive up here. But it was a great time forecasting up there. It was challenging as anything. We had to get guys to work riding actually in snow plows to get to the office. The first time I ever had to do this, we lived, of course, in military housing, and to get out to the street, it was about, let's say 12 feet or so to get to the curb. The snow was piled up so high, we actually had to dig a hallway to get out to the street. And you couldn't see traffic coming. You had to go out to the edge of the hallway and look around to see if any traffic was coming. And the snow lasted a long time up there. So next time anybody complains about Pittsburgh weather being gray and cloudy, I'll take that any day based on what we had up there. But we had a good time out there. But again, the Air Force listened. They said, okay, you've been up here, K.I. Sawyer, for a little while. Where do you want to go next? I said, you got to thaw me out. I said, I've had enough of snow for a little bit. So I got sent to Panama, and which was interesting. That was probably one of the more interesting assignments I ever had. I worked for U.S. Southern Command. I was a weather officer there, and this is back in the mid-'80s. During the Reagan years, I got to brief Ted Kennedy, Gene Kirkpatrick, and a lot of other dignitaries that would come through the Panama Canal area. And I got a real education. We call this mid-latitudes. We're 40 degrees north roughly here. That's mid-latitude. You can see fronts coming usually several days in advance. The numerical weather models we use handle them usually pretty well. So you can have a good advance notice of when things are going to come through. Tropics is a completely different game. Here we have pressure changes, we have temperature differentials that we could track. In the tropics, it's pretty much the same. What we used down in the tropics to be able to forecast were wind shifts. And you didn't have very many observations. So you would sit with a satellite image and a map of known winds that you had, and you would fill a picture in of what the wind field was perceived to be, both at the lower levels near the surface and up in higher levels of the atmosphere at about 20, 25,000 feet. And when you did that, then you got a picture. We would call them easterly waves that would come in, and you would track them, but the changes were very subtle. And the wind fields and also orographic or land effects. The land heats up in a day, it heats faster than water. The cold air is denser, the cooler air, if you'd say, from the water, it rushes in, it lifts up, you get showers and thunderstorms. At night, it's a little bit different story. The land cools off quicker than water, and so the storms are pushed off the coast. Lather, rinse, and repeat is pretty much what it was. Our job was to tell when there are going to be breaks in the weather. We didn't have any hurricanes down there. It's a little bit too far south to be really affected by hurricanes, but still was an interesting assignment for me. When I left there, I was very, fortunate again. Air Force sent me to Texas A&M, got my master's degree. By this time, I was interested in tropical meteorology. They sent me for tropical meteorology. And then in the infinite wisdom, they sent me to a desk job after that. I went to Andrews Air Force Base, and that was there. I was about 10 years into my Air Force career, and I had to make a decision. I love the Air Force. They were very good to me, but did I want to stay in? There were a lot of changes taking place, and I still wanted to forecast the weather. I love the weather. I wanted to be out in it. I wanted to forecast it. I wanted to get my hands dirty with the weather. And what I made it a very difficult decision to do was get out of the Air Force active duty and go over to the National Weather Service. And it was difficult at first, but I wanted to keep my foot in the door with the Air Force, so I went in the Air National Guard. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So concurrently with my time in the Guard, I joined the National Weather Service and went up to Portland, Maine, back in the snow again. Maine was beautiful, enjoyed forecasting up there. And I went to assignments, and I was in Cleveland for a little bit, working with the FAA, still part of the National Weather Service. There's air route traffic control centers, ARTCs, across the country. There are 22 of them. And each one has a 4-person weather unit that works with the controllers. And if you were ever delayed on a flight or you got diverted from the years 1993 to 1996, I'm sorry, but we were probably one of the ones that did that. The job, especially in the summer, was forecasting where are thunderstorm lines going to develop. Do we have the east-west plane routes, almost like an interstate system for aircraft? They just can't go where they want to go. They're on specific routes. Is it going to close a route off? Do we have to divert you north or south? That was an interesting job I did for several years. And then I decided to go, and I did this of my own free will. Actually went to North Dakota, Grand Forks, North Dakota. I can't get away from the cold weather. So we went up there in 1996, and we were there for the big flood, the Red River flood of 1997. Little known fact, the Red River of the North that goes through Grand Forks, North Dakota, it separates North Dakota and Minnesota, is one of the few rivers that actually runs from south to north. And that creates a lot of problems because it starts thawing in the south quicker. All the water starts flowing up north, but the river up north is frozen. It goes eventually up into Winnipeg, and it creates some really noteworthy floods. The flood in 1997 was one of the worst. And typically, Grand Forks gets less snow than we do here in Pittsburgh. That winter, I believe, was 117 inches of snow, which is just outrageous for a place like North Dakota. The snow started melting. There was no place for it to go, and had some record flooding. Grand Forks area, probably one of the worst floods I've ever seen. We lost part of our house in the flood, but there's no place to go. Grand Forks is so flat, it's like if you spilled a glass of water on the floor, that's what Grand Forks was like. The water goes everywhere. We send somebody up in a plane to take a look. We wanted to know where the boundaries of the flooding was. And the guy called back. He was one of our employees, was almost in tears. He said, I can't tell. He said, I can't tell where it ends. That's how widespread it was. So that was tough. And you talk about... the one meteorologist would get cursed at a bus stop. there was one house, we kept forecasting the river to go up and up and up and up. And there was one house, a 2-story white house, I'll never forget this as long as I live, that actually got lifted off its foundation, twisted, and deposited quite a few feet from its original foundation. And our original forecast was for 47 feet of flood. It actually crested, I think, at 54 feet that year. And he wrote in orange spray paint on the side of his house, 47 feet my ass. So every day going to work, I got to drive by that house, and it's a reminder. I think I'd rather take somebody yelling at me from a bus stop. But other than that, had a good time up at North Dakota. Great people up there. The weather was incredibly challenging. And that was when I got a break, though. 1998, I got to come back home. I told you I'm a Pittsburgh boy, so got to come back home. I went to the office, National Weather Service office up in Moon Township as a senior meteorologist, and it was great coming back home. Had a good time. And that's where my Air Force career coincided again. I told you I was in the Air National Guard. I was the commander of the 146 weather flight over. We're on the 171st Air Refueling Wing. And 146 weather flight is a 18-member unit. And at the time, we supported Air Force Special Operations Command. And I thought, hey, this is great. What could possibly go wrong? Here I am back at home. My parents are here. They get to see the young kids. I'm working at the Weather Service office. I'm doing my time over at the Air National Guard. And then 9/11 happened. And for me, it was a challenging professional time, but it's probably the time I grew the most as a meteorologist. At the time, since we were part of Air Force Special Operations Command, we supported all of their operations, and they were worldwide. They call themselves Tip of the Spear. Well, guess what they took when they went Tip of the Spear? They took their weather people with them. So we deployed, everybody in our unit was deployed after 9/11 in some way, shape, or form. And it was an interesting several years. I got my chance to go in January of 2003. I got sent over to the Iraq border for 5 months deployed. And I wanted to talk a little bit then about the use of meteorology in the Air Force, and especially how it applied at the time during our deployment over on the border to support operations there. Here, the forecast is a little bit different. I can tell you, partly cloudy tomorrow, 30% chance of a shower, low of 48. And that pretty much does it. It's a lot more intricate when you're trying to forecast these operations that have I'll say very specific thresholds. And they want the information in hourly chunks, 3 hourly chunks. And one of the things that we did over there was we developed a 120-hour or 5-day forecast out in 3-hour chunks to give to the operators. It wasn't enough just telling them, you're going to do this mission tomorrow. Well, here's your weather forecast, and we'll see you later. We got to work with the planners. Instead of letting weather dictate to us, do you go or not, we wanted to turn it around and say, here is the forecast. We know what your goals are. This is how you can utilize the weather to best meet the needs of the mission. And it was very specific, and people say, well, what's a big deal? You're on a desert. It's going to be hot, it's going to be dusty, that's all it is. That certainly wasn't the case. The dust storms were the biggest hazard we had. Think of a huge cold front coming across and sweeping up dust as it comes across. We lacked a lot of data at the surface, but we did have satellite imagery, and we were able to track these fronts and these dust storms coming across the desert and when they were going to attack the area of operations. And it isn't just, well, here's a dust storm, it's dust, period. Where did that dust originate from? What is the particle size? If it's a dried lake bed, the dust is going to be much finer, and it's going to create a lot of problems. It's going to stay in the atmosphere a lot longer. Your aircraft are going to be more affected by it once it's stirred up. Did it rain recently? Is it caked on, or has it been disturbed already? And the wind's going to pick it up again. There are so many nuances of forecasting in the desert that I was able to learn. And I spent 5 months over there with a 5-person team, and really proud of the folks who went over. They did a fantastic job, and to this day, I consider that probably the most significant forecasting challenge that I've ever had was forecasting in the desert. So then I came back to Pittsburgh. I came back to be a forecaster, and I was changed. The 5 months over there definitely changed me. and I was hungry for another challenge. I wanted to do something different. Again, I said I had it made. When I got back to Pittsburgh, I said, I'm done. I ain't going nowhere. Folks are here, back with our friends in the community. We're not going anywhere. And then, lo and behold, I went ahead and bid on a job in Alaska, at Anchorage, Alaska, and got the job. That was at fall of 2003. And I'm here to tell you, it is 4,181 miles from Moon Township to Anchorage, Alaska. And it is one heck of a drive. Down here in mid-October, it's nice. Some of the best weather we see all year round. You know, a lot of blue skies. Temperatures are just starting to cool off a little bit. It's still nice. You can still get away with wearing shorts. And then we packed the car up at the time. It was my wife, my 2 kids, myself, 2 gerbils, 2 house plants, and a goldfish named Georgie made the trip in a Honda CR-V, a stick shift, going on the Elcan. It was a 10-day drive to get there. And we started off, of course, it was beautiful here in Pittsburgh. And we went up through North Dakota, visited some friends, and then we went on the Elcan. By the time we got on the Elcan, I'm here to tell you that British Columbia and the Yukon and Northwest Territories are not as pleasant in mid-October as it is here. We did hit some snow, but not enough to stop us in any significant way. But 10 days later, we did make it up to Alaska. We didn't even make it out of Moon Township, though, before my wife knocked over the goldfish container. We managed to salvage the fish. That fish lived for 5 years after that trip. That was a tough goldfish, let me tell you. But Alaska was something. That was the best move I ever made. The weather in Alaska and the challenges in Alaska were something. I've never seen anything like it before. They call it the last frontier. Well, I guess space, that was Star Trek, but it was still the last frontier. You talk about wild conditions up there. You go out of the cities and you are, let's just say, if you go in the woods somewhere, you are no longer the top of the food chain. There's a few creatures that are higher ranked than you, and you'll find that out real quick. But Alaska weather was really interesting for me. I was named the National Volcanic Ash Program Manager, and at the time I had no idea what that meant. Volcanic ash, what is this and why is there a national program? And then I got quite an education on that. Volcanic ash, when it goes up in the air, there's a famous story about a jet that was coming in to Alaska many years ago, and a volcano erupted and put ash up over 25,000 feet in the atmosphere. And this plane was coming down, a jet plane, and got caught up in this ash cloud. And the ash is so abrasive, when it'll hit the engines, it'll ruin the engines. So their engines went out in this volcanic ash cloud as he's descending. So now both engines are out. The ash hitting the windshield was so bad that it was sandblasting the windshield of the aircraft. He couldn't see where he was going. So they're basically gliding into Anchorage. They came out of the ash cloud just in time to restart the engines to have a safe landing. But I was at a lunch one time where the pilot was speaking. He said once they got out of the ash cloud, they had to move the windshield wipers to give them a slit in the windshield to be able to see how to get to land the plane safely. And that was one of the reasons they started the National Volcanic Ash Program. There was a worldwide grouping of 9 volcanic ash advisory centers that cover the entire globe that monitor volcanoes. And more importantly, when the volcanoes do erupt, and they're erupting all the time, how high is the ash going in the atmosphere? If it's a low-level event or the trajectory of the ash comes out the side of the volcano, you don't get too crazily concerned about it. It's a local issue. But if that thing blows straight up and it goes up 25,000 feet or more, then you've got some real issues for aircraft across the world. And once the ash cloud gets in the atmosphere, it stays there. And it'll propagate across, it'll follow the wind currents. And we try to maintain the shape and integrity of the cloud as it goes over and put advisories out for aircraft to not fly in this area. And they're showing now that even little bits of volcanic ash can really do a lot of harm to aircraft engines and create more maintenance issues at a sooner routine pace than they would normally do for normal maintenance. So I got a real education doing that. Did that for a little over a year. Got to go to some interesting meetings and meet some people from around the globe. And then they named me deputy director of the region. And then I got to do some different things and got to do some more travel in Alaska. And I want to kind of change up a little thing here. Now, this is where I'm going to grab the third rail just a little bit, talk a little bit about climate change. When I was in Alaska, I got to go some interesting places. I was in Nome, Kotzebue, McGrath, of course, Fairbanks and Juneau. But one of the places I got to go was Barrow, Alaska. If you're familiar with the geography of Alaska, Barrow is at the very tip of the state, sticking out into the Arctic Ocean. Point Barrow is the second most northern point in North America. There's one point, and I have it in my notes, I actually wrote it down, a little trivia for you guys. Let's see. Murchison Promontory in Canada is 40 miles farther north. So you were pretty far north. And again, I'm from Pittsburgh. We don't have glaciers or anything like that here, even in cold winters. So when I got to Point Barrow, I wanted to go up and I wanted to see what it was like to be at the very northern tip of the United States looking out in the Arctic Ocean. So there was a big flow of snow that goes up there, and they took me up and they were showing me around Point Barrow. And I got out of the truck and I started going up because I wanted to get the view from the top. And they said, Chris, I wouldn't do it. It's polar bear season and they're pretty hungry coming out. So I said, okay. So once again, not the top of the food chain, but it was interesting because my dad was in a Seabees during World War II, and I got to see some of the Quonset huts that he built in Barrow, Alaska during the end of the World War. So it kind of brought some things together for me. But you guys aren't getting out of this easy this morning. There is going to be a quiz. Here's the first question for you. True or false? Barrow, Alaska gets more snow than Pittsburgh.
False. False.
Very good. They get about 10 inches less snow than we do here in Pittsburgh. Sometimes it's almost like a snow desert. Barrow is interesting, and this is all tying together because I want to use it to introduce the climate change. I'm not here to convince you one way or the other the climate change is happening, but I saw it with my own eyes up in Barrow, Alaska. Barrow is a really interesting place. If you're an artist and I said you get two colors, you get gray and you get brown, paint me a picture, you would paint Barrow, Alaska. You think of it, and I would think of a rugged landscape, and you build a house, you build a house. Not so. There's a lot of, I'll call it marsh, that's there, and you can't build on it. It freezes, and in the summertime with air quotations, it gets very swampy up there. So what they were doing, and what for years and years and years to build a house, they would get long telephone poles that get barged up to them. They would dig a hole in the ground about 20 feet deep. They would put a slurry mixture of water and sand in that hole, take the telephone pole, stick it down in the hole as far as they could go, and then the slurry mixture would freeze around the pole and set it in place. And then they would go and get a saw and cut all the telephone poles off the same height. Then they would use that as a base to construct their house. What started happening, and this is back in the mid-2000s, so this is over 15 years ago, there was warming, and it wasn't such permafrost anymore, and it was starting to heave, and the houses that were built on the poles then started having some problems with the heaving poles. There are photos of the landscape such as it is in northern parts of Alaska from 20 years ago. It's barren, there's nothing there. Now, there's bushes starting to grow. There's change taking place. They called it Alaska the canary in the coal mine for climate change, and I personally saw it when I was up there. There's a lot going on now. There's a few things I want to talk to you about too. I don't know if you paid attention to the news a couple of weeks ago. They said that down in Antarctica, there was a glacier roughly about the size of Los Angeles that broke off and went into the water. They said there's another one. They said roughly the size, I couldn't believe it, the size of Idaho that is fracturing now, and within 5 years they also expect it to fall off, which of course is going to have implications. When people talk about climate change or global warming or whatever you want to say, they say, well, we had 8 inches of snow here in March. I don't see no global warming going on there. it's harder to relate any singular event that we see here in our mid-latitude world to climate change. But when you go and see things like this happening, it's a longer-term effects in ways that you don't really expect. For me, I watch temperatures and what are the normal temperatures and all that, and you could see a slight uptick. But when you go down in the polar areas, the change, at least from my perspective, is happening quicker. And what this has is implications that you don't typically see. What I didn't think about before was, how does it affect the oceans? And to me, the oceans are one of the places you're going to see changes first. You all know that in the oceans, you have conveyor belts around the world of ocean currents. The Gulf Stream for us is the big one, up east coast of the United States, then branches out and goes across northern sections of Europe. Well, what's happening now, the glaciers are melting. You're introducing fresh water into the saltwater oceans. What you're doing is disturbing the salinity of the oceans. You're also reducing the speed at which those currents operate. The fear is that these changes in salinity could result in some type of a loss of some of the ocean currents that bring the warm air north and take the cold air south. The Earth, when you think of the Earth, the reason we have weather, the whole reason weather exists, the Earth is a globe. The Earth would love it if everything was normalized. If it was 55 degrees at the North Pole, 55 degrees in Pittsburgh, 55 degrees in Florida, the Earth would be happy. But it's not. The Earth is a spinning globe. It's wobbling on its axis. It's rotating. There's moisture. There's clouds. So what happens? The Earth is constantly trying to get itself into some kind of an equilibrium. Polar vortex, the dreaded polar vortex that invades us in the winter, is a part of the Earth just trying to get itself to regulate the temperatures. That's when we have all the cold air moving south. So think about it then. What would happen if the currents stop? You're going to have some colder temperatures building up. You're not going to have that renewal of temperatures across from the equator up towards the poles. One of the theories, and again, it's not proven because it hasn't happened, is that we would see sharper and longer periods of cold weather should the currents weaken. And from what they've been able to measure, the currents are slowing down a bit. I don't think it's anything immediately that we have to be concerned about. But when I think about climate change, I want to monitor the oceans. Of course, if the oceans become stratified, more carbon dioxide is going to be absorbed into the water. The acidification of the water is going to affect the coral in the water, living coral reefs. The fish, the fishery seasons is going to be disturbed. The fish are going to migrate to where they're more comfortable. There's a lot of implications there with the changing temperatures. It's kind of interesting on how that goes. So what is the answer now? So I brought up climate change. The climate is changing. There's one politician that was talking about climate change, and they even mentioned, they said, the rivers are not freezing like they used to. The politician also noted that the ponds are not freezing as deep as they used to freeze. And that politician was Thomas Jefferson back in the early 1800s that made that observation. So I guess my point is the climate on the Earth has been changing. It's been changing since the Earth was created or came about. And the climate is going to continue to change long after we're gone. The question now is, how much is man affecting that climate change? And I guess the bigger question, I'll leave all of you to ponder because I don't have the answer, I'm just a meteorologist, is what could or what should we do? How can we change it? There are some people that say that how arrogant of man to say that you can change the climate of the world. I think to a certain degree that's true, but the world got together. Remember the ozone hole? That was before global warming. The ozone hole was what we used to hear about a lot. The Montreal Protocol was developed back in the 70s and was voted upon, I think, 87. And it is one of the only resolutions to pass through the UN, unanimous. Every country in the world voted for it. And it's actually now the ozone hole, it's not gone, but it's shrinking, and it is being repaired. So you can do things. Where do I stand on it? As a scientist, I look at it, anything we as man can do to reduce emissions is going to be good. So I'm all for it, but you have to get all the other people in the world to play along. And that's where the trick is. And I'll leave that to the politicians, and I'll leave that to you to ponder. But I just wanted to bring that up, that when you hear about climate change and you hear people prescribing that climate change to, well, we were 5 degrees below normal yesterday. Well, there you go, climate change, not necessarily the case. And I want to talk a little bit, too, about that. We talk about normal temperature for today, I believe, is a high of 60 and a low of 40. We're all over the place. The normal is an average of over 100 years of data. Very rarely will you get the high temperature for today to be exactly 60 degrees. I think the high today we're going for is 50 degrees. You're going to be all around that normal, and it's just the average of what you get. So when you hear about that, again, I'm really nervous when I get people attributing certain changes in temperature for a short period of time to climate change. But I will say this. They have shown that these storms that we see in the summer, when we see big thunderstorm complexes, it just pour down rain, and you see the flash flooding that takes place. They're saying that that's partly it because the atmosphere is a little warmer. Of course, warmer air can hold more water, so these storm systems can produce more rainfall. That's a big issue that we're facing right now as well. There's also great implications, and here's where the oceans come in again, for the effects on hurricanes, hurricane activity, hurricane development. How is that going to affect them? They're saying, well, the hurricanes are going to be stronger. Right now we have the warm, but it's all balanced. We have the warm Gulf Stream. Hurricane comes across, hits some warmer waters in the Gulf Stream, it develops. So what happens if the Gulf Stream diminishes a bit and there's a little cooling there? What effect will that have? Again, these are all questions that will be answered. I'll tell you in about 100 years. You can come back and tell me if I'm right or wrong on that one. All right. Let's talk real quick about tools of the trade. I said I wanted to talk a little bit about how forecasts are made. Forecasts have come out real quick in history. When I started back in the 70s, very basic numeric models. We would take a snapshot of the observations in the atmosphere or the surface. We would run them through numerical models, and it would spit out solutions, if you would. Usually went out to about 48 hours. We thought that was great. Wow, 48 hours, we can tell what's going to happen in the weather. They were very primitive models. Today, the one that we use, the Global Forecast System, or GFS, when you hear them talk about the American model, it's the GFS. It goes out to 368 hours now, and it goes out to, that's 16 days. We could see what the models are trying to tell us. Back then, we only had a few levels of the atmosphere that it would spit out data for, and it was up to the meteorologist to interpolate, what does that mean? So if I have a trough at 500 millibars located in Ohio, how is that going to affect the weather in Pittsburgh? And it was kind of up to us to use our imaginations a little bit and expertise that we had. Now it's very different. We have a complete four-dimensional model of the atmosphere in north and south, east and west, vertical, and also in time that goes out for 16 days. And it's unlike anything we had before, and the models are getting better and better and better. You watch a lot of the news programs now, they have their own numerical models, and it'll do these simulated radar projections for that time period. They'll all show, this is when the model showed the rain is going to come in tomorrow, and they're getting really, really good with that. All the models are. The radar, though, is probably one of the biggest changes that I saw. Back when I started in the late 70s, we had an FPS-77 radar. It was an old leftover radar from the war that we were using it to detect weather. You had to manually crank it around, turn the magnetron on, engage it, and it would give you a fuzzy shadow of black and grays. And you had to interpret it. Did it have a sharp edge on this inflow area? What did it look like? And then you had to put on a storm and with your hand crank the radar up to see what the height is. And I'll tell you what, that was cumbersome in trying to figure out what's going on, especially when you have a whole bunch of activity out there. That was the old military radar. Now, you guys, thanks to your tax dollars, you have the biggest and best weather radar in the world, the WSR-88D, Weather Surveillance Radar 1988 Doppler, which was what we have from the National Weather Service. There's 160 of them across the country, Puerto Rico, Guam, and a few Pacific islands that have them. And I'm here to tell you, folks, that is the best purchase your tax dollars have ever made. Those radars are incredible. You can see now, we just used to be able to see there is something out there. We know there's a thunderstorm. We know there's a core of this thunderstorm. We think it's going to be hail. Now we can see the movement of the particles in there. When they come on and they show you the velocity, we can tell whether it's coming towards us, whether it's going away. We can see the rotation in a storm. We never used to be able to see that before. We have programs now that will take that data and give you a cube, and you can see the three-dimensional outline of the storm. You can see hail shafts. It's amazing now what we have. There's algorithms that will give you the time and location. If you can pinpoint a cell, you can tell where it's going to move, what's the rate, and that's when they come on and say, there's a tornado warning, tornado is located towards point X, locations affected are towns A, B, and C at these times, and they'll give you like 8:16 a.m. and the time. That's actually the algorithm on a radar automatically detecting that and giving the meteorologist the information as to where that's going to go. They've even improved that since now we can tell the shape of the raindrops falling. It's a dual polarization effect. And you say, well, what do you care about the shape of a raindrop? It delineates whether or not it's frozen, freezing, whether or not it's hail. If there's scatterers, we can tell now, we can see debris from a tornado. As a meteorologist, you don't ever really see the tornado. We can imply through the rotation that it's there. Maybe reaching the ground, may not be reaching the ground. We don't know that from the radar. But if we can see a debris field coming from that location, we know it's affecting the surface. So the radar is changing, and it's going to continue to improve. That big soccer ball up in Moon Township, that's the radar, that's the WSR-88D. People say that, well, I could feel it, it's running. No, you can't. It only goes 7 seconds every I think it's a minute or every hour. It's a short burst of data. It spends most of its time listening, and that's where the Doppler effects come in. As that particle moved towards or away from the radar in the time that it took. And all this is being calculated. That radar is spinning, though, to be able to receive this information. There's radar that is under development now. It's called phased array that would eliminate those parts, and it is something. If a storm moves right over the radar, the radar can only go up to 19 degrees elevation. So you have a little bit of a hole above the radar. These new phased array radars that are being developed and being researched right now can go up to 60 degrees, which would eliminate a lot more of that. I'm not a radar specialist, but I do know enough to say that it's exciting to see what's going to be coming in the future. I want to make sure I don't go over time. Oh, I did want to talk to you about this, so. True or false? Another quiz. You know what tornadoes are? They classify EF5 as the highest, the strongest tornado. Usually see those in Texas and down in Mississippi, Arkansas. Has there ever been an E5 tornado in Pennsylvania? True or false? True. Anybody? Bonus points. Where was it? It was up in by Sharon. It's a Wheatland. It was 1985. 31 May 1985 is when that happened. It came across the Ohio border and moved into Pennsylvania. Terrible tornado. That was a huge outbreak day across this entire area. And I'll just say that the 31st of May here in the Pittsburgh area is not a good day. We actually had folks that would take off, meteorologists, on 31 May. There's another event that happened. More bonus points. What else happened on 31 May? Nope. This happened down in Johnstown. Little bit of a flooding issue back in 1889, yeah. So that was the day that happened. We had, in somebody else, I heard some other answers. 31 May, we had flooding, we've had tornadoes. That last week of May and first week of June is an awful time for severe, that's our peak time for severe weather here in this area. June 2nd, 1998, I was on the radar that day. I was one of the meteorologists working the radar. We had the tornado that went through downtown Pittsburgh, went up on Mount Washington. So for folks to say that we are immune from tornadoes here, that is not the case. Real quick, I want to talk to you a little bit about Weather Ready Nation. And what that is, that was one of the programs I got to work with. I got the best job offer I ever had. Somebody, one of the leaders of the agency said, you want to come in and develop about a 15 to 20 year plan for the agency on how we deal with things. And I said, well, what do you mean? A strategic plan to take us into the next decade through the 20s. And it was an interesting problem to try and solve. We're used to, and I use example before, partly cloudy, 30% chance of rain. So think about this for a snow forecast. I'm going to take you guys to Washington, D.C. So you're in Washington, D.C. Forecast comes across and says, forecast for tomorrow. We're going to be cloudy tomorrow. We're going to see some light snow falling, snowfall an inch or less. I don't really think too much about that. But now the question is, in Washington, D.C. especially, when is that snow going to fall? If the snow is going to fall, let's say between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., it's not a big deal. If that snow falls at 6 in the morning and 8 in the morning, folks, you got a major issue, even if it's only an inch. So what we wanted to do, it's not enough to just tell people what is going to happen. We tried to work with emergency managers and decision makers in cities and communities all over to better help them prepare themselves for the effects of the weather. And as climate change, whether you're a believer or not believer, and that's fine, but as we get more people, more areas built up, they need this information more than ever. Same for school districts. So if I tell you that same forecast, an inch of snow, we see we can do the roads around here. If the snow is going to fall again in the morning hours between 10 and 1, no big deal. If the principal says, should we let the kids out after a half a day? No, you don't want them out on the road at lunchtime. Keep them in school, let the road crews get out, get things put together. You'll be fine by the time the buses come in the afternoon. That's a type of decision support, and that was a big thing of Weather Ready Nation. Now what we're trying to do is provide impact-based decision support services to decision makers across the area. As I was putting this plan together and working with a team, this is back in 2012, we had the big Joplin tornado. Joplin tornado killed 161 people, and that's unacceptable. Why, in this day and age, did 161 people die from a tornado? Granted, it was an EF5. It was one of the strongest tornadoes we've seen. But why did that many people die? And we wanted to go back and have a conversation with survivors and with people that were working in Joplin, and we found out that people didn't understand at time what the warnings were. What's the difference between a tornado watch? What's the difference between a tornado warning? When do you need to take safety? Where do you go? What should you do? How should emergency management officials work in these situations? And one story I'll tell real quick. I was giving a presentation in West Virginia, and I was talking about this. I was all proud, chest thumping, that we got a forecast really good for West Virginia, and we told you 30 minutes in advance, you're going to have 70 knots of wind coming through your town. And I had a guy in the back of the room, never forget him, put his hand up. I said, yes. He said, sir, he said, I don't know what a knot is, much less what 70 of them are going to do to me. And I'm like, he's right. He's right. So what we should have said is that winds are going to come through, widespread power outages, trees will be downed from this, and give the effects of what will 70 knots do to you and affect your life. So do you need to go out? If we're giving the possibility hours in advance, you need to make sure your generator's ready to go, make sure you have some water, so on and so forth. So that was a lesson that got drilled home. But that essentially is what we're trying to do with Weather Ready Nation. And I'm going to make sure I don't overstay my welcome. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I wanted to talk with you a little bit. Do I still have a couple minutes?
Yeah, we got to save a little time for questions.
Got it. Okay, this past winter season, what was your impression? Was it a good one? Was it a bad one?
Lousy winter.
Lousy winter. It was well, I think all winters are lousy. But as of this morning, total snowfall for Pittsburgh for this winter season, 44.1 inches. The average is 43.4. So we were right on average. Does anybody know? Okay, largest snowstorm on record that we had in the Pittsburgh area over a multiple day event. Who said 1950? There you go. There was a Thanksgiving one that came up. My mom and dad used to talk about that one all the time. 27.4 inches of snow on that Thanksgiving storm, November 24th through 26th, 1950.
5 inches at my front door.
But let me ask you a question then, and this is one thing I wanted to talk about real quick. Measuring the snow is not an exact science, and we found that out in North Dakota. We had 50, 60 mile-an-hour winds blowing the snow sideways, and one of my jobs in North Dakota was to go out and measure snow every couple hours. How do you measure snow that's blowing sideways? I had 10-foot drifts against the building, and I had bare grass in other areas. It's highly scientific. I won't take any time to go into it, but finally, I'll leave, and I'm going to leave some time for questions. What is the outlook coming up for the rest of the spring and for the summer months? I checked with the Climate Prediction Center, which is part of NOAA National Weather Service, and right now, it's not very conclusive. What they're saying is a slight chance of above normal temperatures and a slight chance of above average precipitation. So it's not really much to hang your hat on, but it doesn't look like anything crazy coming. But do watch out this weekend. Going to be some snow mixed in with some rain. Not going to be the nicest spring weekend. And with that, I will stop. Thank you so much.
Question?
Yes,
Here, wait.
you're next.
Let's do the microphone.
On my phone,
Yes.
I get weather information hourly. Where does that information come from to my phone?
Is it the current observation or is it a forecast? If it's a current, like, I don't have it on now.
It's going to start raining at 10 a.m.
That is coming, there's a few different things. If it's a private company, which it probably is because the Weather Service doesn't do that, it would be a lot of times the data coming from the Weather Service, National Weather Service in terms of numerical models, but a lot of private companies will run their own smaller models, and they'll put that output, they'll sell it to companies like Apple or whatever. And there's some bigger companies that do that as well. But a lot of times, they'll use the information that's produced by the National Weather Service, and they'll tailor it towards other applications, and that's a huge growing industry.
I got a story and a question. The story is several years ago down at Disney World with kids and family and so forth, went from a tornado watch to a tornado warning to an actual radar sighting of circulation. Mm-hmm. Blue coats at Disney World emerged everywhere, had everybody underneath within less than 5 minutes.
You've warmed my heart to hear that.
It was impressive.
Good.
Question. Can you kind of talk a little bit about supercells and tornadic rotation and how tornadoes normally, if I'm right, form in the southwest corner of the cell?
The supercell, it's textbook. Is what you see. You see a lot of supercells in the southeast United States. You have the Tornado Alley, of course, going through the central part of the United States. There's also the Dixie tornado belt now that people are saying is developing, where you see a lot of tornadic outbreaks, especially this time of the year, February and March and early April. But the supercell formation, we don't see that much around here. When you're in the South, we know working with the Storm Prediction Center, SPC, in Norman, Oklahoma, what days are good atmospherically. You need right conditions to develop for these supercell tornadoes. As a radar operator, you can latch onto those because you see them developing. You know the atmosphere is ripe to produce them, and you can follow them, and you have a better chance to put warnings out well in advance. When you get up here in Pittsburgh, we typically don't see supercells. What we'll see is some rotations develop over a few scans of the radar, and that is, at least for me, infinitely more difficult to try and put a warning out with any lead time, because you don't want to cry wolf, or else nobody will pay attention. That's one of the societal things we found out. So I'd say up here you have the weaker tornadoes that are more short-lived and harder to detect on radar. But kudos, I don't work there anymore, but the Pittsburgh office I thought did a great job this past year putting out warnings and detecting those. The radar, I get a great investment. Sir.
Since you're a Penn State graduate, what do you know about the AccuWeather Corporation?
Large corporation, know very much about them. We partner with them. There's a private partner relationship that we have between the government and the local industries, and it's in every part of Weather Ready Nation is that we're all working together to get the message out. AccuWeather is very good at taking the message and amplifying it and getting it to more ears. Same with the Weather Channel. Good people at the Weather Channel, we had a fantastic working relationship with them. They would amplify that message. A lot of people, when bad weather's coming in, they'll turn on the Weather Channel, and to have the crawler underneath or to have one of their meteorologists on the air amplifying our message from this local office here is priceless. And that's what Weather Ready Nation is all about, is that partnership, everybody working together to get the message out. Sir.
Yeah, I have a question. When I'm watching national news, they always have the American model and the European model.
Yep.
What's the difference?
Okay, the American model is the one I mentioned, the Global Forecast System, GFS. And that's the one that basically we have in the U.S. The European model is exactly that. It's a model developed by European countries, and it's very good. Some people will swear by it for longer-term forecasting of especially winter events. But by and large, especially in the short term, we rely a lot on the GFS model.
My next question, you talked about the Joplin tornado.
Yes.
Did that hit at night?
No, that was daytime.
It was daytime.
Yeah. And it was, if I remember correctly, I believe it was early afternoon, which is why nocturnal tornadoes are absolutely the worst. You're asleep. Unless you have a NOAA weather radio or something that's going to go off and alarm you in the middle of the night, you're going to sleep through and you should be taking shelter. But what made the one perplexing about Joplin and disappointing as a meteorologist is that it happened during the day and we still had 161 deaths.
We've seen the same weather pattern move from Texas to South Carolina for about 6 weeks in a row. Is that typical of the time frame, and is the magnitude the same as historically, or is it different?
You lock in patterns in certain times of the year. It's a not untypical spring pattern to see that happen. You could just time the systems going across. I know they've had a lot of severe weather going from Louisiana across on, like you said, on over through South Carolina. So not really unusual at all. And it just depends on the pattern you're in right now. And I know for us, we haven't had a really nice sunny day here with above normal temperatures, and it's just part of the pattern we're in for April.
One more question.
Being that you're an Air Force guy, I flew the North Atlantic for the better part of 20 years, and we get these little ups and downs, these little things, and young co-pilots say, oh, mountain wave. I go, where's the mountains? We're 1,000 miles from any mountain. Is that a pressure wave event?
Gravity waves are very real things. And as a matter of fact, the retired director of the National Weather Service, Dr. Louis Uccellini, was big on gravity waves. And gravity waves will propagate downstream many, many miles from a mountain. Depending on the conditions have to be right, though, atmospherically.
Well, I'm talking, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you'll get it feels like a mountain wave, and I know, like crossing the Rockies, you get mountain waves 200 nautical miles downstream or more. I've witnessed it. But in the middle of the ocean, that's why I was wondering, with the pressure systems around, do they create this kind of atmospheric phenomenon?
You can get gravity waves propagating out from storms. It can happen. Yeah. So it is possible. They're tough things. You can see them on satellite imagery usually, but they're tough to forecast. That's why crossing the ocean, it's, as you know, it's an interesting proposition, trying to get things just right. And then put that, I'll go one further, taking it to the surface end, trying to forecast the Ocean Prediction Center, another NOAA National Weather Service facility, trying to forecast conditions in the ocean, and that's tough too. But satellite is tremendous.
Okay, Chris, thank you.
Thank you all very much. It was fun.